Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes. I'm the Chief Sales Sergeant here at Bulletproof Selling and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. Now, here at Bulletproof Selling, we believe that hope is not a sales strategy. And so we're coming to here as often as we can to help you take the lessons of the battlefield and bring them into business. Because in the battlefield, hope has to be removed. I mean, the stakes are too high, the situations are too stressful, and the environment is constantly changing. And if you've been in sales for any length of time, you know that that is exactly a mirror of what the world of sales is like. Stressful environments constantly changing. No plan survives contact with a prospect as well as we plan. We have to be willing to pivot. We have to have systems behind how we do that so that we can be more present in the conversation. Now, I get to talk to salespeople all over the country, all over the world, really, in the keynotes that I do, in the consulting work that I'm doing, and the people that reach out to me after reading Bulletproof Selling or listening to the audiobook Bulletproof Selling. And they say, Sean, we're in sales, but we find that systems are the thing that really help us up level what we do, because you can learn how to sell well, but you notice that there are very few people that are still selling 20 or 30 years after they start. There's a high attrition rate in sales. And I think that comes because people don't take the time to capture what's working for themselves and for their team and make sure that those lessons are passed on. Now, in the military, we were excellent at doing that because, again, the stakes were so high. But why shouldn't they be that high in the field of sales? Why can't we look at continually up-leveling ourselves, going from just having a basic understanding, a basic knowledge of what we do as salespeople, and moving upward, moving into an area where we're masters at it? And when we think about mastery, at least in formal education, well, you go through high school, you go through your bit of university, maybe you leave with a bachelor's degree. But then if you really are dedicated to something, I mean, you want to delve deeper into it, you want to really have mastery over it, you get a master's degree. Well, when I was approached by someone that is actually running a master's degree type of program for salespeople, I said I had to have them on. So if you're willing to play with me here, we're going to take the field of sales from the military through education and teach you about a way of looking at sales that puts you in mastery of it, that puts you in a mode of continuously learning and, of course, delving deeper into the things that make salespeople better. And so the author of the Sales MBA and the leader of the Sales MBA program, I would love to welcome to the show, Mr. Douglas Cole. Douglas, welcome to Bulletproof Selling.
Thank you so much, Sean. It's great to be here.
So for those of us that haven't read your bio, maybe we haven't read the Sales MBA yet, walk us through a little bit about your journey in selling. I mean, how did you get to the point where you're taking something that there really is very little formal education for in the field of sales, and you created an MBA program for it? Walk us through that journey.
Yeah, sure. Well, I got into sales, as many people do, somewhat by chance, I guess. My former career was in consulting. I spent many years just working with senior clients, just trying to help them with growth and operational strategy improvements. And then I made a transition into tech and sales. It struck me that despite my business school education, despite all the consulting projects that I had done for different industries and verticals, I had never really properly learned sales. I had never learned what the true growth engine for any company. And so I set out to master the craft as a practitioner and as a leader. And I've been doing that over the last several years. My main day job is with LinkedIn, where I lead a team that's trying to grow LinkedIn relationships with large enterprise customers. And then I have this other hat, which is basically a teaching hat. So I've been creating courses on sales acumen or business acumen within LinkedIn. I've been teaching courses on consulting fundamentals outside of LinkedIn. So I just have a strong interest and a passion for teaching. And I guess that's what led to the book, because as I was trying to marry some of the things that I had learned in my former consulting life, and I was trying to marry some of those business acumen principles with sales challenges, as I was learning those, I was putting together this mini MBA for sales within the context of LinkedIn for their global sales team. And in the course of doing that, I was getting lots of real-time feedback on what was working and what wasn't. And I started to iterate the content, sort of test it out in external settings. And ultimately, I just decided that this needed to be a book. I felt it was more painful for me not to try to codify the information in book form than it was to walk away or to do it. So that's why I made it a project to write the Sales MBA.
Now, where does a salesperson have to be in their sales journey and their sales career to really benefit from an MBA? I mean, you think about the way most people learn sales, and I'm sure you've seen this thousands or hundreds of thousands of times. A little bit of training, maybe a couple of days, and then basically you're thrown into the deep end of the pool. If you manage to swim, you might have a career in sales, but most of the people end up at the bottom of the pool. So I'm curious to know, for an MBA level program, do you have to have already been in sales for a decade, or are you specifically targeting certain sales industries? Talk to us a little bit about where a salesperson has to be to really benefit from that higher level training.
Yeah, well, I think analogously, just as in the case of an actual MBA, you do have to have had a few years in industry and at least cut your teeth, in the trenches to be able to get something from the program. And I think the same thing applies for the sales MBA. I think you essentially have to have been in the business long enough to have. I would say that there's a general progression that most of us go through in sales that I'm sure you can relate to, and both from your own experience and watching others. I think that generally when people start out in sales, the people who are new to it or the absolute beginners are fundamentally in the first phase of their journey. They're mostly trying to be likable. They're a little bit uncomfortable at the fact that they're trying to get a business person, usually very busy business person, to buy something from them. And so that gives them discomfort, and they try to process that by just being as charming and likable as possible. That's sort of stage one of their career. Then they progress to the second stage, which is much more about mutuality. That's when they start to see the interests of the client. They start to see how those interests potentially intersect with their own, and they become more passionate about trying to engineer these win-win outcomes. And then I think there is the level at which the material that I'm focusing on comes into play is when people are trying to make the transition from that stage to the next level. Because I think that the next level, in essence, people who get really good at sales, they move from likability to mutuality to what I would call plausible objectivity as a seller. So in other words, they are seen as a trusted advisor by the client. They are seen, despite the fact that they are carrying a quota, despite the fact that it's obvious that they have a vested interest in getting to a signed contract. Despite that, they are seen as someone who is genuinely objective, legitimately dispassionate in terms of the way they're looking at the variables of that sale, and therefore able to offer a valuable and a useful recommendation. So that level of objectivity, I think, requires a deeper understanding of what's going on in a sale. And that's what I'm trying to address with the book.
And do you find that salespeople, to get to that third level, which I find is a great level to be at, because you probably have enough revenue coming in, enough either recurring or new leads coming in, that hey, life is pretty good, so that you can focus on being more objective. I remember in the early days of selling, and I'm sure you remember your early days of selling as well. I mean, it's a grind. You're just picking up, smiling and dialing, banging the phone down as many times as you can to try to be likable enough to get people on board. But I'm curious to know then, is it something, this third level of being a salesperson, where you have that objectivity, where you're seen as that trusted advisor, is that something that salespeople can engineer, or is it really something that we have to kind of fall into after years or decades of being in this industry?
I think it is a combination of something they can engineer and something that emerges naturally. I think that, in fact, what I'm trying to do with the book, in essence, is try to accelerate the process by which that happens naturally. I think that what I'm trying to do is distill and simplify the three main variables that come into play at this level of objectivity. And so what I'm trying to say, particularly, and I should make this clear, I'm talking about salespeople who are selling to corporate buyers as opposed to B2C sales environment, a real estate agent, for example, or that kind of a scenario. Someone who's trying to sell to a corporate buyer basically has to understand three domains. You have to understand the domain of strategy. You need to understand the domain of change, how organizations evolve, and then you need to understand interpersonal psychology. And so what I'm trying to do in the book is break down these areas. I think that these are things that one naturally comes to understand just through the process of being in the trenches and exposing oneself to the challenges of selling. But what I'm trying to do is call these details out very explicitly and in a very easy to understand manner, even though some of these are complicated notions, and just therefore accelerate the learning journey so that people can get to that higher level more quickly.
And because you get to work with these experienced salespeople a lot. I mean, obviously, running a program about the sales MBA, you probably vet people to get into your personal inner circle where they get one-on-one time with you. So I'm curious to know, from the people that are at that third level, do you find, and obviously I'm very biased with systems, obviously, we're here at Bulletproof Selling, of all things, we're very big on sales systems here. Do you find that those people have systems they're using either consciously or unconsciously that allow them to get to that third stage and stay there? or is it really just, luck of the draw? They happen to be great at interacting with people and selling. What do you find the preponderance of if you had to throw it in a balance?
I think you're absolutely right. When you and I are talking the same language when it comes to systems, I'm a huge proponent of systems in general, and certainly when it comes to sales. And I think that the main benefit of having a system is, I think there are two benefits. One is that there's a predictability element, right? So you can't get to a point where it's very, very difficult to get to a point where you can predict or forecast your outcome as a salesperson unless you have some type of system that is making the future, more tractable, more manageable in some way, right? So that's one thing. I mean, it's hard to build a pipeline and therefore have growth prospects without a really well-defined system. The other benefit of a system, just as important, I would say, is that a system creates mental space for reflection. And this is extremely important when it comes to this higher level, because I guess one of the macro challenges that any seller is facing in our current environment is just the increasing feeling of overwhelm, that there's so much more information to absorb. There's so many more new developments to make sense of. One thing happens, and before you've had a chance to adjust to that, then a new development has pulled the carpet out from underneath you. So it's just the change velocity is so dizzying that you need space to think. You need time to reflect on what you're trying to do. You're not going to be successful just through quantity alone, through all those smiling and dialing motions. You're going to have to be much more surgical and much more thoughtful in each action that you take. And so that's one of the main reasons why I think systems are so powerful, is that you do need to be able to step back on a regular basis and just remind yourself, okay, what are my most critical accounts that I'm focusing on? What are the most obvious ways in which I can add value to that organization, that I can get the attention of the people who matter to this deal and advance the deal? So those questions are never going to be properly attended to if you're just overwhelmed by daily reactive activity. They're only going to be possible if you have a well-defined system that creates you space, gives you the space to step back and to think and act more deliberately.
And that was something that we absolutely saw on the battlefields. I was able to embed with military units across all branches of the U.S. military, even ran into some Canadian exchange officers along the way. You guys are a well-defined, tight unit as well. And something that we saw about systems was exactly what you said. It allows you the time to step back and reflect and ask, instead of just, throwing darts at the wall and seeing what sticks, do we have the ability to map out what success looks like ahead of time? It's never going to go off according exactly to plan, but having a plan walking in is better than winging it. Absolutely. And something else that we found really interesting was that, and you touched on this, that systems allow us to not have to reinvent the wheel. So in combat, of course, we don't want to take a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds, throw them into a very dangerous situation and have them try to figure it out on their own. Not a lot of people are walking back from that. But if we have, 200, 300 years of lessons learned, which you can absolutely build through a sales team, maybe not 300 years, but 30 years, 3 years, 3 weeks is better than I see a lot of salespeople leveraging, of things that go right, things that go wrong, and what do we do if this objection happens, or if my pipeline is not looking good at the end of the quarter, whatever that situation is, so that we don't have to try to invent success every single time in a new way. So I'm 100% with you on the value of systems there. And so I'm interested, Douglas, then, with all the salespeople you work with, at whatever stage they are, among those 3 stages, where do you see them relying on hope more than they should in how they sell, how they advance themselves, how they learn? Just think about all the things that are involved in a sales career. Where do you see people relying on hope more than they probably should?
Well, definitely in the earlier stages. As I said, the likability and mutuality stages are much more hope-based than the objectivity stage. Again, this goes back to the core theme of our discussion here, is that as you become alive to the importance of systems, you become more conscious and more focused on the areas in which you can control the inputs. At least some of those inputs. You're never going to control all of them. There's always going to be a significant amount that is completely unpredictable. But as you begin to focus on the controllables and to exert your influence on them, then you move out of that hope-based view. I would say that the main kind of hope that the type of hope that I see most often is just, particularly in younger sellers, the hope that which excites you excites the customer just as much. And
Mm.
that is very rarely the case. That this is, one of the one of the one of the typical delusions for many of us is just assuming that what gets us going is also going to resonate with someone else, and so the purpose of this framework and it is to get us out of our own heads and to think about the external dynamics that influences the strategy of your client, to get us thinking about organizational dynamics that influences the change agenda at your client, and then get us thinking about the interpersonal dynamics, which of course influence how you present information, how you highlight the right details for your client. So yeah, I would say hope diminishes as you become more alive to your ability to control the controllables.
And so I think a great system then to build for any salesperson, especially the new ones, but I've even seen senior salespeople fall into this trap where projections are not looking so great. And so they pick up the phone, they start calling people they might not have been in contact with for a while or at all. And they think that being likable, falling back on what might have gotten them through their first couple of years is what's going to help rebuild their pipeline. And of course, junior salespeople, it's all they got. They don't have a pipeline. So it's all about likability, trying to be charismatic. And neither of those things, to your point, are the things that are going to help the prospect achieve a better end state, whether it's personal, professional, or a mixture of both. So let's build a sales system on how a salesperson can move beyond likability. Because and I'm sure you've experienced this, Douglas, where a salesperson, whether I'm reaching out to them or they're reaching out to me, if they approach me with a situation like, I really don't need your business, but I understand that you have a problem that I can help with, and we'll find out real quick if this is a good fit or not, both with the service I have to offer, the product, or personality wise. Because I'm just not a good fit for everybody personality wise, and I'd rather find that out early. Somebody approaches me like that, they have my attention, and that's much better than showing up trying to be charismatic, trying to be likable, trying to be super fluffy best friend on the phone when I don't even know you. You're wasting my time already. I've got enough friends in my life. I don't need a new stranger on the phone trying to make friends with me. You know what I mean? So when we build systems in sales, in the military, and here in the world of bulletproof selling, we're trimming hope away from what we do. Every new system takes another little piece of hope out of the equation. And so when we talk about trimming hope, we use this acronym TRIM to just help us, because military is big on acronyms, as you know, help us understand systems building. So the T in TRIM is the trigger element. So if I'm a salesperson and I'm trying to move beyond likability, trying to be more like that second or third stage salesperson that you referenced, when do I need to bring this system into play? Should it be on day one of my career? Do I need to figure out a little bit about what I'm selling and the value it has before I try to move beyond likability? When should I really bring this into play?
Well, I think it's never too early to bring this into play. I think that, again, if I'm talking about somebody who's selling to corporate buyers, the key question, to go back to your emphasis on systems again, which I deeply share, is that you need to ask yourself, okay, what can I automate each week? What are the activities that are just going to become recurring, repeatable activities, no matter come rain or shine, hell or high water? These are the things that I'm going to do each week. And so, for instance, one needs to know who are your most important accounts. In any territory, it is foolish to assume that all of your accounts are worth the same. You need to have some basis of prioritizing the critical few that are going to trump the trivial many. So you need some basis of estimating the potential size of prize for those accounts, and then your probability of capturing that size of prize. And so you rank order your accounts. You choose those which have the highest SOP. You then rank based on the feasibility of those bets. And then you should have some picture of what your, let's say, 20% or less are the most important accounts for you to be focusing on a regular basis. And then what you need to do is you need to have these repeatable actions. And those need to consist of what am I doing each and every week to better understand those accounts? What research activities am I doing to go deeper on what's going on with those accounts in real time and perhaps more broadly? Number two, I want to know what are the differences? What are the changes I need to make to my prioritization based on these developments? Do I need to shift things around at all? And number three, what is my prospecting motion? How many outreach notes am I committing to send, each week, for these top accounts? And I think if you start to define the elements of that system, your prioritized accounts, and then the activities that are happening each and every week for you to better understand and then better engage with those accounts each and every week, What's going to happen then is that you are going to create this space for yourself. And again, to go back to what we were saying before, the benefit of a system is that it creates space for reflection. It takes a lot of activities that would otherwise have been just consuming too much of your brain power because they are reactive, putting them in the systems area so that you don't have to spend an undue amount of time on them, and it's going to give you more time to reflect on the deeper issues. And I think once you have that space for deeper reflection, then you can start to apply the principles that I'm talking about in this book, which are understanding, becoming more of a strategist, becoming more of a change agent, becoming more of a decision architect by focusing on these external, organizational, and interpersonal areas.
And none of those things that you just mentioned that are featured in your book are how to be the best friend of your prospect, because that might naturally occur. I've got people that I ended up, doing business with that are my best and closest friends now, but it didn't start out that way, nor should it. So I love the idea of this allowing reflection, because I want everybody that's listening or watching to pay attention to what Douglas just said. The steps that he just outlined. We talk about, how do we move beyond likability? He didn't mention anything about be less of a friend or be less valuable. He mentioned tactical things that you can do at the beginning and end of each week and each day to map out what are the things that I'm committing to do for my prospects to provide value to them, committing to outreach steps so that I don't have to rely on being likable, because you're going to run into people, and Douglas, I know this has happened to you in your sales career, they're just not having a good day.
Yep.
There's no chance of a conversation right then. It doesn't mean they're not good prospects. It doesn't mean they can't remain one of your top 10 accounts. But if all I'm doing is just, throwing out lobs whenever I feel like it, I'm never going to be able to figure out how do I get back in touch with them? When's a good time? What is the thing that is going to help them really engage me in a conversation? So love the idea of account prioritization and mapping out some basic first steps as the trigger element. The R in repeatable the R and trim is make this thing repeatable, because I want to be able to do this across prospects, across territories, across geographies, potentially even across pipelines if I'm selling to different verticals in different markets. So what are the couple of steps, just 4 or 5, and there might be a lot of things couched underneath each of those 4 or 5 steps, but if I'm trying to move beyond likability, I've already done my account prioritization. What are the couple of things that I need to be doing repeatably to make sure that I'm not falling into the trap of trying to be likable or charismatic as my chief selling strategy?
Yeah, sure. Well, let's break it into the 3 categories that I'm talking about. So let's assume that you're now at a stage where you've prioritized, you've instituted these recurring activities for research and for outreach each week. And so now what we want to think about is the space for reflection, and what are the kinds of questions you want to ask in that space for reflection in order to refine your pitch or your frame to the client and to new contacts within that organization. So the domains that I'm talking about are, as I said, external, organizational, and interpersonal. I'm talking about becoming a strategist, change agent, and decision architect. And so within the strategy domain, I would say that there are 2 key questions that you need to ask. One is, where do they compete? Where does this company compete? And how will they win? Because the essence of strategy for any business is a clear set of choices around where they're going to compete in terms of a target buyer. Any business that has formulated a strategy has to go through this process. There's the classic example of Steve Jobs when he took over Apple after being away from the firm for about 11 years. And he came in and he took hundreds of products and he simplified them down to a simple quadrant of 4. And he said, we're going to focus on 4 products, and that's it. And so what you need to understand, first of all, is where is this company competing? What are the choices that they've made, and what by implication are the areas of the market that they have excluded from consideration? So, and then once you have a sense of those choices, you should also have an understanding of what it's going to take for this company to win. And that is really useful for you to know as a seller, because ultimately, if you are trying to sell, particularly to senior stakeholders, you need to be able to talk the language of strategy within that firm. You need to be able to link the value of your product or service to that which is going to give them a competitive advantage. What are the relative strengths and weakness of that company? And how can you play to those strengths and downplay those weaknesses? And so that's the first set of questions within this reflection space. In the role of a strategist, how do you understand those external dynamics? And I'm boiling it down to those 2 key questions. Where do they compete? How do they win? The second area that I think is important to reflect on are these organizational dynamics. So at any given time in any organization, I think the key questions are, where is the energy for change in this company? And how can I feed that energy? As a seller, the least efficient thing you can do is try to convince them that that which matters to you should matter to them.
Yeah, which too many salespeople do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not impossible. It's just that it creates unnecessary work, and you should always be asking yourself, what is the path of least resistance here? I mean, selling is hard enough, and so you want to go with whatever currents you can find in the river, and so on the level of change, those two questions: where is the energy for change coming from? How can I feed that energy? That gives you. You can start asking yourself questions like, what are the themes that are continuously coming up? What's getting a lot of the airplay or most of the airplay within this company? And once you become alive to those themes and those internal initiatives, then you're in a position to be able to get someone's attention, because you can then start to link the value of your product or service to what is already being championed internally, right? So that's the organizational dimension. And then the third one is this interpersonal dimension. And in the role of a decision architect, I think it's really important for sellers to see themselves as psychologists, as sophisticated psychologists. At the end of the day, they're trying to work within the bounds of attention, of bounds of rationality, bounds of self-interest for their prospects. And so you need to have an understanding of what are the details that matter here, and how can I get my prospect to care about those details. And so these are hard questions. These are questions that require space to reflect. And this is, again, why I think having a system that ensures that you maximize that space for reflection, so that you can give these questions their proper due, and you can use your insights to continuously strengthen your outreach.
I thought it was interesting the order you put those in too, Doug, was because a lot of salespeople kind of take the last couple of steps that you had and they front load that into their sales process by asking, what are the questions that I need to get my prospect excited by, not knowing any of the other things, right? The strategy of the organization, where I need to align my product or service so it's in alignment with that. What's the path of least resistance? I've seen so many, and I've made this mistake too, which is all I can say in integrity of, showing up and saying, here are the things I care most about. How do I get you to care about them now too? When there's really no way to cross that bridge unless I convince them it's worth crossing the bridge, because what they're after is what I'm after. And we have that partnership now. So I love that we got this trigger. We got making it repeatable, which if you follow Bulletproof Selling and any of the listeners out there, a lot of the stuff we deal with is extremely tactical. What do we say on the phone? What do we do? How do we shape and craft great messaging and emails? This is all strategy stuff. But the reason that the military spends so much time on strategy, the reason you should spend so much time on strategy as a salesperson, is because with a great strategy, you can minimize the amount of tactics you actually have to implement. In the field of sales, this means a shortened sales cycle, faster acceleration through the pipeline, all the things that we indicate as success in the field of sales. Great strategy helps that happen better. So that's why we're focusing so much on strategy. So we've got the trigger, making it repeatable. Now the iron trim is making the system improvable. And we learned in the military, Douglas, real quick, that as soon as we executed a strategy, our prospect, our opponent, had a vote. And the next time we tried to execute it the same way, in the same place, in the same area, it probably wasn't going to turn out with the same results. So we needed to make sure our systems were constantly being iterated. And that's a word that you used already. So I'm curious to know, in this system, what do I need to be paying attention to in order to iterate this to make sure that it is improving, that it is keeping up with the changes in my market?
Well, I think that within the system that we talked about earlier, which is prioritizing your accounts and then defining those research and those outreach activities that are recurring each and every week, I think within that system of outreach, you do need to be embedding some type of A/B testing mechanism. In other words, for those who don't know the term, and essentially within any kind of software testing or environment, you have two different versions of the same thing, A/B, and then you iterate, you test that out on a wide enough sample size in order to see which of those rises to the top. And I think something similar has to be going on in your outreach system. You do need to be experimenting with slightly different variations of essentially the same thing. So, for example, I can remember in our own team, one of the things that we tried was we used to have these two different versions of the software that the client could buy. They could either buy the advanced version, with all the bells and whistles, or the trimmed down version, more basic version. And what we ran this experiment once where we were trying to do two different versions of an outreach message. And one of those versions was rooted in the potential benefits to the client of graduating from the basic to the advanced version. And then the other version of it, the B version, was talking about what they would lose by not having the advanced version. So we were trying to test the concept of using sort of a loss-based frame for the information as opposed to a gain. And the loss-based frame turned out to be much more effective. And so I think what you need to be doing is experiments like that, is asking yourself, what can I test? What can I test and see what the results are. And so I think that type of A/B construct needs to be part of one's system in order to ensure that you're always iterating and always learning.
And building that in when you're creating this system is going to save you a lot of time and heartache at the tail end, because it's a fallacy to think you can execute a great system and then look at, well, I probably should have been doing something on day 1, but now I'm in day 90. You got to restart that whole cycle on a new set of prospects if you're going to try to A/B test something like that. So as you stand up the system, I absolutely agree. Just build in a couple small changes that you execute systemically across all your prospects so that you know this was the A group, this was the B group, and then take a look at that at the tail end. Which one performed better? Which one do I need to put more emphasis on? So absolutely great way to improve. So we got the trigger, repeatable, improvable. The final piece in this is to make sure that the M in trim is in play, which is measurable. Because if I'm taking that, investing the time for myself, my team, my organization to actually pay attention to the strategy of what we're doing and the strategy of our prospects, where their organizations are growing, what their goals are, that's a big time investment that I may not be making now. So I need to be able to justify this on the tail end. What am I measuring, Douglas, to make sure that I'm, one, achieving in my mission of moving beyond likability here? We're actually moving into becoming equal partners, or at least objective resources and experts to our prospects. And of course, that our sales are getting better. What do you recommend that we begin measuring to make sure that we are, in fact, not trying to be charismatic and likable as our primary strategy?
Well, I think that the system that I've laid out so far is very much a sort of barbell system, in the sense that we are focusing on very, very detailed lower level activities and much higher end and more strategic objectives. So we went through this exercise that we talked a minute ago of going through your territory and conducting this 80-20 analysis, where you figure out what are these critical few, and then you have these repeatable activities that you're applying to those critical few. So I think on the low level, in terms of measurement, you do need to have metrics each week that ensure that you're held accountable to a certain level of performance. You do need to be able to say, I am committing to X number of outreach messages, per week, and I'm committing to generating X thousand or X million in net new pipeline generation, such that I have a 3-to-1 coverage of my pipeline relative to my projected revenue outlook as an individual or as a person, right? So those kinds of metrics, I think, are really helpful. Just the measures that ensure that you are holding yourself accountable to systematic activities each week, measures that are holding you accountable to an aspirational buffer state as in terms of an outcome for those activities. And then I think it's important to go back to your military analogy, of course, and the after action review, which I know is so critical to the military culture. I think something similar has to happen with, at the higher end, when you're talking about these large goals. You did go through this process of determining what your critical few were, and you did go through a process of identifying your ambitious goals for those accounts. And I think it is imperative at the end of a deal cycle, whether that was a big win or a big loss, is to reflect on what you predicted and what actually happened. Yeah, because your model, you can only really rely on your model and your system to the degree that it is predictable. It'll never be fully predictable, but you do need to know the extent to which it was that it was a valid projection of the future versus the extent to which it fundamentally misread the variables. And so that's another measure, I would say, is that the after action reviews that happen at the end of the sales cycle, where you reflect back on your assumptions and whether or to what degree they were validated by the outcome.
And that's so important, Douglas. The after action review actually dedicated a whole chapter in Bulletproof Selling just to the sales debrief. That's how strongly we believe in it. I saw it save lives on the battlefield, and I see it save sales and organizations every day. So thanks so much for actually including that bit. So important that we do take the time, not just for our own success, but for the team's success as well. Because in that after action review, we'll learn things that could benefit every other member of our team, that might help shape how our marketing department does what they do, that shapes how our customer service department delivers what they do. So many things can be gained out of measuring, taking the time to look back on our results. We are playing with variables because that's the nature of sales. What was the tolerance in those variables so that we can set better goals next time? Maybe we need to increase gross pipeline input. Maybe we need to increase gross activity, whatever that looks like. So this has been a really high level chat. Most of our folks are really tactically focused. This is, of course, going to be up in strategy, as a good MBA program should be. So, Douglas, for people that are interested in learning more about the work you're doing, the LinkedIn courses you have, the book that you wrote, how do we get deeper into your world?
Yeah, I would say two things. The best thing would be to go to the salesmba.ca. That's the website that has information on the book, has information on a newsletter that I'm going to be launching very shortly. So that'll give some regular content to consume, and of course the book itself on Amazon is where you can go to buy it, and both basically anywhere in the world, and that's where you can get all the content on the program. So that's what I would say.
Wonderful, sir. Well, we'll definitely make sure that we link through so people have access to those via direct URL. And of course, for all of us here at Bulletproof Selling, make sure that you're following us on LinkedIn, on YouTube, where every single one of these conversations with brilliant sales leaders like Douglas has been housed absolutely free. They keep you busy for a while. 80 plus sales systems built in there right now. And of course, for this podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes, anywhere that podcasts can be found. And of course, for more sales systems each and every week to help you replace hope with certainty in your pipeline performance, in how you sell, and of course, the enjoyment you're able to get out of the great profession that we get to have as salespeople, make sure you're flying over to bulletproofselling.us, where those resources are posted absolutely free. Well, Douglas, it's been a pleasure serving the sales community alongside you, sir. Let's get out there and make selling bulletproof.
Let's do it. Thank you so much, Sean.